This is the most powerful message of the gospel. There's no thing that is so great that God's love, his hope, cannot overcome it. There's no sin that you can commit. There's no depth that you can go that God cannot reach in and redeem you from that. And I am living proof that that is true. Nothing that this world has to offer is a challenge to the one that brought forth its existence from literal nothing. I think that we find ourselves losing hope is because we have misplaced that hope. When we misplace the rightful place that Christ is supposed to occupy in our lives become imbalanced. So some people place their hope in possessions. They place it in their things and they stockpile and they save and they've got collections. I don't know if you guys are people who collect things, but I know one of the silliest collections, and if you do this, I'm sorry, but I knew a guy that collected shoes. And I'm like, why shoes? He called himself a sneakerhead. I'm like, that's not cool. I'm sorry, it's just not. And I was like, do you wear them? He's like, no. I said, what's the point? That's just, like, they're just, I'm not gonna go off of that. Anyway, some of us put our hopes in possessions, though. Our cars, our houses, our things, our knickknacks, our tchotchkes, whatever. But between moth, rust, and fire, it doesn't last. Some people grow up and they place all their hopes in jobs, and maybe even in the money that it'll provide. That's a common question to ask kids. What do you want to be when you know what kids, when you ask kids that question, they give you dreams because they don't really think about like finances. They just think about what they want to be. And so for a lot of us, like that hope, we place that hope in that concept of an ideal job, and then all of a sudden reality hits like a ton of bricks. And you're like, I gotta pay taxes? This is awful. Or sometimes we put so much of our hope in a job and then we lose that job. And I'm speaking from personal experience. As somebody who's been doing ministry for a while, I put a lot of my identity into being a pastor. And there was a period of my life not that long ago where that was taken away from me. And I have to admit, I struggled with that. Because in my mind, I thought of myself in this particular job, and I failed to see that like I was God's creation. And so when we put our identity in a job or in a title, and then we lose that, we wrestle with that. For some of us, we put our hopes in our bodies or in our health. And when that fails, that really rocks our faith. I, for one, have decided I'm never going to die. And I am inadequately prepared to have that disproved. But we do, like when all of a sudden our health fails us, or sometimes when it's the health of people that we care about, we realize how much of our hope we put in that thing, and it challenges us, and it causes us to question God's goodness. Here's the thing, every single one of us in this room are created for hope. We just are. It's in our DNA. We are designed for hope. And in the absence of God, many people will fill that void with unworthy substitutes. We are built to believe in something bigger than ourselves. And as a church of God, we have the answer to what that bigger thing is supposed to be. One of the biggest ways I've seen people misplace their hope is when they place it in other people. That's the big one. We place it in friendships. We place it in family. We place it in romance. I've had so many of my friends foolishly place their hope in another person to fulfill them and complete them and make them whole. The truth is that people are fallible and they'll let us down. One of the most unromantic but apt things that you could say and when someone gets married is, cool, you just put two sinners together for life and said, good luck. We like the idea of like, you complete me. The reality is, no, of course they can't. You're just bringing your own mess into a situation and you are trying to do the best you can, but absent God, you'll fail every single time. That misplaced hope, I think, is perfectly exemplified sometimes even by like our election cycle. I'm gonna say something, and some of you guys are gonna hear this as a political statement, and it's not. So if you write me an email, I'm gonna refer you back to this time message where I told you not. There are too many in the church, I'm saying church, capital C, that placed a lot of their hope in a particular political candidate. And when some people felt like they lost and some people felt like they won, it got wild. And it was crazy working at a church at a time where all this is happening. But here's the problem. that no matter what happens every election cycle, no matter who's in the Oval Office, it's always the same person, a sinner. It's always a flawed human being. That's because that's people in general. And it was an interesting thing to observe just how some people place their rabid hope in a person or an ideal. And it was always supposed to be about Christ. Christ wasn't concerned. It's not like God woke up and thought, wait, who won? Oh no. He knew. He had a plan for everything. And that hope for the next election cycle. So remember this when that comes around. Only God can really complete us. Here's the last main reason I think that we experience hopelessness, and that is overwhelmed hope. When the problems confronting us seem so great that hope itself cannot overcome it. We lose sight sometimes of the awesomeness of Christ when confronted with the enormity of our problems. I had a really profound moment a while ago. I was raised in a Christian household. I knew who God was. My parents had taught me all the right things. I did like Bible drills. I went to Awanas, all that jazz. So I knew who Jesus was. I knew it here. But when I kind of grew up, I strayed away from the faith, especially when I got into high school. I actually used to have to go to church as a result of the punishment that I got into. So I would screw up. My parents would make me come to youth group. And so I would attend, and in my rebellious heart, I didn't really want to engage. I thought that I was being clever. I would like sit in the front row of youth group, sometimes like hungover and fall dead asleep. And in my mind, I thought I was getting away with a lot. And then I got into ministry and I see those same kids. I'm like, you're not getting away with anything. I know. And I had this moment. So I got to be a volunteer and then an intern in the church where I used to attend in high school. And I remember one particular Sunday morning, I'm doing my lesson, and there's just like that kid. You know, that kid, just a kid you just want to love so much. And I remember as I'm doing my lesson, and I see that kid, I'm just like shaking my head. I'm just like, oh man. And here's what I did in my heart. In my heart, I said, that kid's a loser. And then I realized he was sitting in the same place I used to sit. That took me back, because I knew in that moment that adult me would have looked at high school me and thought, loser. I've lost perspective on the power of hope and how it can completely transform us. Because that is the hope of Jesus, that he can take a kid that the rest of the world might write off and might say, loser, and God's like, oh, no. Don't you call my creation that. I have plans for them. And maybe that's you. Maybe you see yourself as being in that role, or it's somebody that you know. Maybe like when you think of your concept of self, when you look in the mirror, you think loser, failure. I know the standard God has set for me, and I know just how far I have fallen from that. It's a great truth of being a Christian, is that we often see our own personal sin as an insurmountable obstacle for Christ to overcome. I think that deep down, we all think that we are the worst sinners that we know, because we don't know the hearts of all the people around us, but we know the darkness of our own hearts. And I think that for some of us, we are quick to excuse, forgive, and work with other broken people, but we rarely ask God for forgiveness because we don't always think that we're deserving of it. But here's what Jesus says. In John 16:33, I have said these things to you, that in me you may have peace. In the world you will have tribulation, but take heart. I have overcome the world. This is the most powerful message of the gospel, that there's nothing that is so great that God's love, his hope, cannot overcome it. There's no sin that you can commit. There's no depth that you can go that God cannot reach in and redeem you from that. And I am living proof that that is true. Nothing that this world has to offer is a challenge to the one that brought forth its existence from literal nothing. I actually think that believing that God cannot is arrogance, that I think. I don't think it's humility. I think it's not special. Sorry, but you're not. In the history of humanity, you think that you, of all people, have done something that God cannot redeem? God breathed life into you from dust. Of course he can redeem you. We mustn't lose sight of the fact that Jesus defeated the grave and all things are possible. He defeated death. You gonna tell me that your petty sins are something that's too big for him to conquer? Absolutely not. And that's sometimes what hopelessness looks like. It looks like this feeling that we're too far gone, or that it hasn't arrived in our time frame, or because we placed it in something that is undeserving of that hope, and we get restless and fidgety, and we think, God, are you listening? Are you paying attention? Are you there? So if that's what hopelessness looks like, let's look at the opposite. What if we truly embraced this idea of hope? What would it mean if we really gave up everything and gave it all to God? Here's the power of hope, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. It has the ability to alter the landscape of the world. I know that sounds like a tacky bumper sticker. I know that sounds like a great little quote for you to write and then think about every now and again. But I want to prove this to you, beyond a shadow of a doubt, the power that hope has. Okay? So we're going to use some math here, right? So we're going to think about the time that Jesus lived and existed and died. Okay, so you have 12 disciples that followed him for 3 years. Minus one, Judas didn't do a great job, right? And then you've got 70 people that he commissioned and sent out, plus a handful of women who were the first to arrive at the tomb. So let's call it roughly 90 people. 90 people when Christ died that were completely sold out on who Jesus was. 90 people. There's more than that here today. So 90 people completely sold out on who Jesus was. 2,000 years ago, over 6,920 miles away, I used Google, right? That's the distance from here to Jerusalem. And those 90 people, 2,000 years ago, almost 7,000 miles away, changed everything. And as a result, we're sitting at the north coast of Oregon talking about that same God. That's proof of the power of hope. Those people were so sold out on who Jesus was, they kept talking about him. And then the people believed in him and their lives were changed. And that kept happening over and over and over again. And thousands of years later, we're still talking about that same hope. If Jesus had just been a good teacher or a decent guy, if Jesus had just been like a wise person that performed some parlor tricks, then there's no way that we would be dedicating a Sunday, and hopefully every day, to worshiping him as the God that he is. That's the literal power of hope. You got proof of the hope that we have in the resurrection. For the vast majority of people on earth, our country wasn't even a myth at the time of Christ, and yet here we are. What else could possibly explain this phenomenon except the power of hope, that Jesus was who he said he was?